Thank you. Okay, members, next item then is the fuel poverty briefing by the NEA. Could I actually formally welcome Pat Austin and Paul Wallace to the meeting this morning, and could I apologise to yourselves for the delay in getting to your item on the agenda, but you can see we have a fairly full agenda from the beginning this morning, and previous delegation had a lot to say as well. So again, apologise to yourselves for your wait. And without any further ado, just to remind members that there's a briefing paper from the National Energy Action on page 20 of your pack. And without any further ado then, Pat, could I invite yourself and Paul to speak to that, to the committee?
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for allowing us the opportunity to come to yourselves and outline a number of key issues which we think are very pertinent in the development of fuel poverty programmes going forward into 2015. I initially contacted you before December to talk about the ending of the NICEP. Since then, I also wrote to the members in relation to some concerns we had around the Warm Home Scheme. And I suppose in talking about the sort of new fuel poverty landscape, I also wanted to briefly touch on the Cavity Wall Inspection Report, which was commissioned by the Housing Executive, and I think will put a queue onto fuel poverty programmes in 2015 going forward. For those of you who don't know us, NEA is a fuel poverty charity, and really we work with campaigning in order to secure funds and resources to tackle energy efficiency. I'm the Director of National Energy Action, and Paul Wallace is our Development Manager. He also manages projects, and Paul will touch on some of the projects that NICEP currently undertakes. Now, the Northern Ireland Sustainable Energy Programme isn't specifically a DSD kind of intervention. It sits with DEDI, and today what I was hoping to achieve was, in terms of the scrutiny role, to ask the committee to look at the development and oversight of the Affordable Warmth Programme, which is the new programme to tackle fuel poverty, which is moving from the Warm Home Scheme to Affordable Warmth. And it's currently in a transition stage, and we have some concerns around the outworkings of that, which I'll touch on. And additionally, we would ask the committee if you could bring to bear any influence in relation to the impact that the NICEP has on ending, and the impact that will have on fuel poverty. And despite it being a DEDI sort of responsibility, it is a key pot of money that we use to tackle fuel poverty across the whole of Northern Ireland. And we install measures in that, in particular cavity wall insulation, loft insulation and central heating systems. The NICEP was initially established in 2001, 1998, but in 2001 National Energy Action worked with the politicians to ensure that we had a ring fence of that pot of money. It is lifted as a PSO, public service obligation, on an electricity bill, and everybody, domestic and commercial, pays something into that pot of money a year. We are currently lifting 7.9 million per year from the levy, the NICEP, and 6.5 million of that is ring-fenced for fuel poverty. That enables organisations like ourselves to bid in every year and ensure that for our particular projects we have a range of measures in relation to cavity wall insulation and loft insulation. And we also, and full central heating systems, we also ensure that that does not compete with the Warm Home Scheme, and that it actually enhances the Warm Home Scheme to some extent and ensures that people maybe who are the working fuel poor are able to avail of measures. Paul actually, in terms of some of the outcomes, we heard earlier people talking about outputs. Outputs are great when we look at some of the big achievements, and in fact when you look at the NICEP funding since 1998, it's spent 64 million. Gross customer benefit has brought in 562 million, and it has lifetime energy savings and lifetime carbon savings as well. But in terms of us actually being behind the doorstep, for us it makes a real impact to the customer. Paul, do you want to?
Yeah. As Pat says, the NICEP programme sort of supplements the Warm Home Scheme, which is due to finish at the end of March. But the good thing we have found with NICEP is that there's people who fall through the net of the Warm Home Scheme because of the eligibility criteria, which primarily has been to do with benefits. So through our projects in Belfast particularly that are funded by PHA, because the Public Health Agency and others see the benefits of a warm home, the health benefits are quite phenomenal that you can bring to a household through energy efficiency interventions. So we identify through that project that we call Northern Exposure, which covers the whole of Belfast. We identify people who qualify for warm homes, but we also qualify people who don't qualify for warm homes but would benefit and qualify for programmes through NICEP. And a couple of examples. I mean, we've looked at the big figures here, the achievements of NICEP, which are tremendous achievements over 10 years. But in terms of the projects that we run, I just was thinking on the way here about 2 families that we helped that wouldn't have been helped without NICEP. One family, the woman was suffering from cancer, whether it's terminal or not, we could look into detail. But she was falling through the net of all the other schemes, suffering from living in a cold, damp home, the effects of that on her as an individual. And through the programme that was offered of NICEP, we were able to give her insulation and a heating system. Now, you could be looking at upwards of £6,000 or £7,000 worth of intervention through the NICEP programme. That's just one example. Another example is another man who's suffering from heart trouble, and he was going for open heart surgery, and he got help through NICEP. These are people who would not have been helped. And our concern is that post-March 2016, NICEP the signals are that NICEP is going to disappear, which is taking upwards of £7.9 million out of the funding programme.
Right. The 6.5, the NICEP wasn't supposed to end until such time as an equivalent scheme was introduced, and that equivalent scheme was the energy efficiency obligation, which DETI had set out in a consultation in 2012, would have been introduced in and around 2016. So there should have been a smooth transition where NICEP almost morphed into the energy efficiency obligation. So as it stands today, the long and short of it is that DETI have had a delay for understandable reasons in the introduction of that legislation, and the regulator has signalled to us that NICEP is ending. So that leaves us with a clear break, and £6.5 million on specific fuel poverty programmes will be lost. Now, I've been working directly with the regulator, and we've had a series of correspondence to and fro. And, you know, some of the rationale around the regulator's decision is that there is an equivalent programme out there. We don't believe there is an equivalent programme out there. She also cites that there will be a customer impact of the ending of NICEP because it is a levy. Now, NEA do not advocate levies on bills. We don't feel that that is the best way to lift this money, but it is an historic legacy which we have. It has been lifted. It's equivalent to £4.10 or £4.80 per annum, and 80% of that was ring-fenced for fuel poverty, so we could live with it in that sense. And customer impact, therefore, will be nominal in terms of what that individual. Most people actually don't know they even pay into this levy. That's another issue. What we as an organisation are trying to do now is protect that money. We think that now is not the time to touch that, and we believe that that money should stay there. And there are other reasons that maybe how it is managed and how it's looked at. There are issues in there, but we don't want to get dogged in that sort of detail. We're saying at the moment it's not the time. In these times of austerity, we don't know what's coming. Well, we kind of know what some of the stuff that's coming down the line. If we can give people warm homes, we can save them income. The cheapest unit of energy, as Paul would say, is the one you don't need to use because your home is warm. We think keep that until such time as the energy efficiency obligation is introduced, and that's now likely to be 2017, 2018. We are talking to a number of people around this issue. We have been talking to Manufacturing NI as well, because the regulators also cited to us that manufacturing, the industry don't like this because they do put predominantly more into the pot than the domestic user. Having had conversations with Stephen Kelly from Manufacturing NI, of course he says anything that reduces costs for the manufacturing industry will be welcome, but NICEP isn't where that's small beans in terms of what they're looking at the moment. They're looking at generation, the design of the single electricity market, and how he feels that disadvantages manufacturing. And additionally, we would say that those people working fuel poor are working in industry, and you know they're working, so we hope to be able to give those individuals something as well, and that's in and around the aspect of ring fencing, the 80%. And finally, another reason why the regulator has cited it should end is that cavity walls, the house condition survey, which is carried out by the Housing Executive, would indicate that most cavity walls in Northern Ireland were filled. So, moving on a little bit, and I know maybe we're jumping about, but I understand we've got time issue. There's been a lot of talk in the industry, maybe over the last couple of years, about cold, damp homes, and people saying, well, is it condensation? And this has been across all tenures. And the Housing Executive, recognising that it was an issue with their tenants, went to the Southern Educational Regional College and commissioned a piece of work to look at invasive properties, 206 of their own properties. And what was found was really quite startling. We have, sorry, Paul, this is there, of 206 households that, they borescoped, they drilled holes in the wall to look at what was, put cameras down to look at what was happening. And of the 206 homes, 39%, 81, had severe with critical needs. 54%, or 54 houses, 26% were unsatisfactory with grave needs, 11% significant needs. So over 75% of houses who feel that their cavity wall has been insulated were sitting with a dire situation, Chair, at the moment. Now, what we're saying is that if that's the problem in housing executive tenures, to some extent they got the gold standard. You better believe it that that's across all tenures. It's across owner-occupied, privately rented houses. Now, 35% of...
Yeah, I mean, the statistics for heat loss from the house, you may know, like 35% of the heat is lost through the walls. Most people think it's lost through the windows, but most of the heat is lost through our walls because that's the maximum surface area. So we believe that if you're going to do an insulation programme, do it right and tackle the walls first. Next of all is the roof, 25% lost through the roof. So it's quite startling that this CERC research is telling us, yes, we thought, and we did with the best will believe, the cavities are filled, but now we're finding, because of the product that was used, and because perhaps of the way it was done, now the cavity wall insulation is failing. Now, without going too much into the technicalities of that, is historically we use what we call fibre in the cavities, as many of you will know. The blue end fibre, similar to what you put in the roof space, well, that sinks over time. So it's not a criticism of the fact that we've tried to improve the heat loss, reduce it through the walls. The product that we used wasn't the best, now we realise. So what they're doing now is putting in the beads, little polystyrene beads, silver bead, which will not sink, and is installed to a much higher specification, and it also stops the damp coming through. So that's what Pat's talking about here, but this, we're being told probably through the house condition survey that most of our cavities are all right. Yes, they were tackled, but now we're finding it's failing. That leads back to the fact that we're being told we're going to lose the £7.9 million that will help us to improve that. So we need to keep the money there for energy efficiency measures to help.
So we're in a defence mode in terms of campaigning. Our initial campaign was around helping to design a new energy efficiency obligation, which was on the supplier. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we potentially have a hiatus where 7.9 million in total is going to be taken from energy efficiency schemes, and we're going to have nothing.
Yeah.
I
think that's, excuse me, so Pat, I think that's really the critical point here regarding NICEP, that in March 2016, the story is, the signals we're being told is that NICEP will finish, which takes over £7 million out of energy efficiency measures, 80% of which will tackle fuel poverty, and is currently tackling fuel poverty. Now, irrespective of how it's lifted, I know it's the levy, and we've got caution about levy, but the householders do not know. They don't realise. If I'm out doing talks around the country, as I do, and I say, you're benefiting from NICEP, I say, Paul, what's that? They don't realise that they're contributing into the big levy, but that it's all coming back to help these people that are falling through the other nets. So even for a year or two, to lose that £7.9 million is of great concern to us, that we need something else in its place. But the other thing that's coming into place is not coming in until 2018 or something.
So additionally to then, I suppose, confuse an already confused sort of landscape, is that we have had historically the Warm Home Scheme, which has been in operation since 2001, in transition now, because the affordable warmth, which is to be delivered by councils, is now underway, and it was launched in September. And again, we would ask the scrutiny role of the committee to ask some questions in and around some of these numbers that we're getting back, because we fully support affordable warmth. We are fully in agreement of when you have a limited pot of money, targeting that the best way you can. But we're not sure that councils were completely up and ready. Now, there's some councils that are fantastic because they were part of a pilot, so they're in the 3rd year. So they're racing ahead. We have asked questions around referrals, because there's a couple of aspects to affordable warmth. It sounds very practical that you would move to local councils. Obviously, the transition moving from 26 to 11 is problematic, because there are different stages and different priorities. But secondly, the mechanics of moving it to affordable warmth are not as straightforward as you might think. The council have to find 1,700 because it launched in September, which was late, but per annum the target will be a map in an area of highest deprivation, a survey through, or a questionnaire, we would say a doorstep questionnaire that the council makes. So the council workers will be out rapping the door, asking a person, you're on a map, you may be entitled to some of these things, short questionnaire, and then all that stuff goes over to the housing executive. So as far as the council's done, as long as they get their 1,000 doorstep knocking on the doors, they're done. And then we're asking questions, okay, well, what happens now? The housing executive then carry out the technical survey, and the technical survey will indicate what works will be required, and in fact they will look at more about the eligibility criteria in relation to income and those other issues. So the council, while it looks, that's the right thing to do, in terms of optics, most of the work is going to be carried out by the housing executive. So after the housing executive then carry out the technical survey, they then give information to the householder, who probably it's certainly got a low income and has been targeted as a targeted area, may be quite capable, but I think we'll find some of these people won't necessarily be particularly savvy. They're then asked to employ the individual and the local person, contractor, to do the work. And again, we're asking questions about protocols, because the Warm Home Scheme had protocols to follow. They had 6 weekly. They made a self-referral. They had to have a visit within 6 weeks, and the work had to be done within a 12-week turnaround, and those sorts of issues don't seem to be there. Now, that all could come good. We're not saying that this is a bad thing. I really want to make that quite clear. What our concern before Christmas was, we were hearing from different councils that they were at different stages and moving at different paces, and we felt we're worried again about the resource. If we take a step back and say 42% of households in Northern Ireland experiencing fuel poverty, we do not want to lose a penny of that money that's going into energy efficiency. 16.5 million is coming from DSD, and will the councils all be ready to spend that money? What we asked to do, which we felt was prudent, and I don't think the minister's minded to do it, is to say, well, can we extend the Warm Home Scheme, who've already been maybe operating for the last 6 years and have had systems and processes set up to ensure that A, we don't lose any money, and B, that there's some sort of infrastructure supporting councils. Some councils maybe won't like that, but some may like it. So we're not 100% sure, but as I say, we've heard that there's been 700 surveys done. We think, okay, we're in February. Of those 700 surveys, how many of them are jobs? And it's back to outcomes for people. How many people have had measures carried out under the new scheme? And as I say, without looking like we're spoiling, because we're fully behind it, those are the questions we feel need answered. And additionally, that 75% of respondents to the consultation which DSD carried out opted for some element of self-referral, because if you're on the map, all very well and good, but we know that there will be people spending more money and in poorer housing, not particularly on a map. what happens to that individual? What happens to the individual who is terminally ill? Is there a self-referral mechanism? Councils, as far as they're concerned, will be saying the maps are the targets and the self-referral is not necessarily a priority. So we need a little bit more scrutiny in terms of self-referrals within different councils.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, thank you. Could I just ask Kevin, because I mean, we have a letter here, and it's on page 45 of your pack. It's a letter to the committee from Bernie Rooney. It's dated the 29th of January, so it really deals with some of these issues. So could I ask Kevin, could you just maybe summarise the essence of a letter in respect of some of the issues which you've heard already raised?
Yes, sure, Chair. Just for members' information, this was a letter sent by the department in response to a letter from H&A Mechanical, and just addresses some of the issues, at least in part. One is in relation to the extension of the Warm Homes Scheme. They've noted, and I know that the committee did write to the department on this quite a while ago, and got a response that the Warm Homes Scheme actually had been extended. It had been extended to 31st March 2015, and that was to allow affordable warmth to become established and embedded in new council structures, notwithstanding the comments that NEA had just made. The other issue was in relation to the self-referrals. Again, this is one of the issues that was raised, and it is not focused. Affordable warmth is not focused on self-referrals. However, there is a provision for self-referrals to be made. The letter on page 47 reflects this. That councils can accept non-target referrals from householders where a member of the household is vulnerable, for example, old or disabled, suffering from an illness where a cold or damp house will exacerbate their condition, and their referral supported by one of the following. And it gives a range of professions such as environmental health, home safety officer, energy advisor, occupational therapist, etc. So the committee, as I say, this is the latest in a series of communications that the committee has had about extending the Warm Home Scheme, and about self-referrals, and about issues in respect of individuals having to seek their own contractor. There's been a number of communications on that, Chair, just for the member. If the committee wishes to, we can find those communications on, certainly in relation to the contracting issue as well. But that gives an update on the extension of affordable on warm homes and on self-referral, and I'll provide the committee with information on the issue with regards to the contracts.
And I take it this letter it's a public letter. I take it this is not a private letter, is it?
No, this is a letter from. This is just the normal correspondence.
So we'll share that letter with yourselves, and then I mean we'll obviously collate all of the correspondence so as we have it all together. Is that fair enough, Kevin? We're able to do it for another discussion. Mickey Brady.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. I should really declare an interest because I had my house insulated about 3 weeks ago. And it's just, you learn these technical terms like cold bridging.
Yes.
Where warm air hits the coldest wall in the room and then causes condensation.
It's sounding like Garnick Shackleton there, but anyway.
But it was interesting because you talked about what they use now and what they use then, because we had an extension built for a disabled relative living with us. Somebody came out and checked it about 5 years ago and said that we had insulation. When it was checked this time, all that fibre had disappeared. And apparently with the beading, they put in like a gluey substance which binds it.
That's right.
So it's a much, you can actually, there's a palpable difference now. But I'll share some of your views about the affordable warmth, because obviously you get great variation with councils in terms of targeting that. The Warm Home Scheme, you're right about the protocols in that. So the transition seems to have been done very quickly, without enough thought maybe being given to that, because my experience both in the advice sector and since I've come to Stormont was that the Warm Home Scheme was a good scheme that worked well for people. In theory, affordable warmth is a good and more comprehensive scheme, but it's like everything else, it's how it's implemented. And you're right, I think some councils probably haven't the knowledge at this point in time to actually roll it out the way it should be rolled out, and people are missing out. And it's the people who are most vulnerable. And some of the case examples in that letter would be indicative of the people who should be getting it, maybe aren't necessarily being targeted, because rather than a self-referral, you have to be targeted in a sense.
Yeah,
I think therein lies the difficulty.
absolutely.
I think you're probably...
And I think that, you know, we get figures, but sometimes I don't think we're asking the right questions about the figures. Then, if that's 700, if those are 700 doorstep, what's happening there? You know, is the housing executive, because it's new for everybody? Are we up and ready yet? And it's not to criticise anybody. I think it's understandable that these things will take time. People are still, finding out what jobs they're maybe going to have in a new super council, and I know it was already, the Warm Homes was already extended, but we are where we are today, and are those councils up and ready? And I think that some of the reasons not to do things are more about, well, the decision has been taken and so be it, rather than what is the evidence on the ground, and are we asking the right questions? What are the outcomes for people? Are people getting warmer homes from affordable warmth? If it's not, then we maybe need to go back and review some things and maybe keep some things running alongside. We really are concerned that we're going to lose some resource.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When you get a copy of the letter, you'll see that the department are actually advising that it's not possible under procurement rules to extend further out. The actual existing scheme comes in the end of March.
Sorry, Alex, can I ask that? Why is it was okay to do it last time? They did already extend it.
Yeah.
What's the issue with procurement now? Sometimes I have concerns that things are being said and it sounds legal and we accept it without scrutiny, and that's where I think we need your help. And we would be asking very much for, people that are much brighter than us know these things. Is that a viable?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm just telling you that's what's in
I know,
the
thank you.
But clearly, we do need, and that's what I said a few minutes ago, spoke to Kevin there, sort of privately there, but obviously Kevin made the point that we have had an ongoing dialogue around this, because, the committee was quite anxious around the whole issue of fuel poverty for some time, still are. So obviously we'd be keen to kind of make sure all that we're hearing is accurate or can it be improved. I think most people would understand that there may well be an uneven balance in terms of capacities around councils to deliver on a range of issues, so we're aware of all of that. So we will obviously explore, we get all the correspondence together, because we're going to have a further discussion on this, and when we give you a letter, we would appreciate if you give us some feedback on it.
Absolutely, appreciate that.
But I think you mentioned earlier on there that I'm not sure where you say the regulator or daddy, but saying there are other schemes out, and you're saying that aren't really. Could you elaborate a wee bit on that?
Sure. We've heard a lot of noise over the last year about heat, the home energy.
That's the household efficiency and thermal improvement scheme.
And it's been predicated on the financial capital loan that is there in government, and with the best will in the world, having had conversations with individuals who are heading that up, it initially looked like a Green New Deal, a kind of a rehash of a Green New Deal, and we feel again that has its place. But in terms of what happened in England and what is happening in England, the Green New Deal isn't tackling fuel poverty. It's struggling as well in England, but and we're not saying that heat couldn't facilitate something. If worst case scenario, there's a space there that we don't lose the 7.9 million. If that 7.9 million was moved across to heat to deliver for the fuel poor, that would be a completely unacceptable outcome for us, rather than it just going with nothing in its place. But the regulator talks about heat as a potential alternative. As it stands now, it's definitely not an alternative. It is not the same, and it's not tackling the same issue. With the self-referral element being greatly reduced, the Warm Home Scheme again has changed into an affordable warmth. There is a place, if you like, for that even pot of money to become a self-referral. There's so much we could do, and maybe deliver better schemes with the NICEP funding. We held a workshop in November, bringing key, I have a report on that, bringing the key stakeholders together, and the likes of Phoenix are saying that the NICEP enables them just to hook up 1,000 individuals into the gas network. I mean, the regulator also has a duty to promote gas where gas is available. So, again, you know, NICEP is meeting other strategic objectives that the regulator is there to promote. So, the scheme that people are there's a lot of noise about, but a lack of detail to some extent is heat. We had made representation to Derry. We've been speaking to John Mills at Derry, and he is last year he was of the same mindset as us, to say, well, you wouldn't be throwing NICEP out until such time as something equivalent came in. And I do believe that potentially Derry are talking to the heat team to see if there's some way that something could be designed or developed. But it's not obvious that that would be the same as what NICEP is doing.
Yeah. I think our primary concern with heat in its original form, as we were being told about it, was that it was maybe a loan scheme. You know, that householders would access heat through getting a loan, maybe at a pretty high interest on what they would get in other places. As Pat says, like we know, and you would know yourselves, the fuel poor households that we're endeavouring to help, we see benefits through NICEP and helping, would not be able to access a loan.
And they can't access a boiler replacement scheme, you know. Even boiler replacement is working for people. You can have up to 40,000, but as soon as we say to people there is a part grant, people can't avail of it, and that's the difficulty we find ourselves in.
That's not to say that heat would not help some people who can afford to take a loan, because if it improves their energy efficiency, it helps in lots of ways, but it wouldn't help the target audience that we're talking about today in its present form.
Surely. Jim? I thought you were indicating. No. Okay, any other member? Okay, Pat, is there any other, no other member indicating to speak at the moment, so Gavin and Paul have any kind of concluding remarks? Obviously we are going to share that letter with you.
Yeah.
You'll have a copy of that, and I would appreciate any feedback from me on that. We're going to collate and assemble all the correspondence we've had to and fro on this in recent times, just to see where exactly that. We will explore and probe all the points that we've been advised of, including any of your own. And on that basis, then obviously we'll have a formal decision to make around what our next steps will be in that. So, are there any other kind of concluding remarks you want to make?
No, I think that's really the three main things, Chair. Thank you. As I say, I understand that NICEP isn't specifically in the remit of the department, but it shares its objectives in relation to tackling energy efficiency, which is one of the main issues in relation to fuel poverty. And I know you held an event a couple of years ago looking at the cross-cutting nature of that, and it would be great to see how the committee could maybe help us access Derry, or look at this issue in relation to the ending of NICEP.
No, I appreciate that, we'll endeavour to obviously factor into what we try to do in this next. So look, could I thank yourselves again, because you've been very diligent in making sure you come to this committee on a regular basis and bring us up to date with all of these issues, and from a very constructive point of view, I have to say. So thank you for that, and thank you very much again. Apologise for you having to wait this morning for a week.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so look, we'll let you know what we're deciding on the back of this discussion this morning.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Paul, Pat. Thank you. Okay, members. Obviously, just on the back of that, are we happy enough to assemble the correspondence we have, and then just maybe have just schedule for a dedicated discussion around that in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, Chair, if the member wish, we could just liaise with Derry via the committee, just to establish if there is any big progress in relation to what might supplant NICEP, if there's any discussions around that. Not entirely. It's very much the NICEP issue is very much a Derry issue. Yeah. And I just wondered if it would be content.
Who would have made the decision? Was it the utilities regulator?
It's utility regulator.
And does NICEP fall under their control?
Yes. The utility regulator said it's going to draw that NICEP to a conclusion in 2016.
And you see the 6 point whatever million that is collected? Seven. Is that lost? Money is going to be lost?
Well, it would stop being collected. And that's obviously the argument utility regulators making, that this money that people are actually paying out by way of a levy, it's they pay it per usage, if you know. It is a small amount of money, but nevertheless it's still a levy, so the regulator would have to formally take it into consideration. We're happy enough we proceed on the basis that we do liaise with those with the department and so on, and then come back and have a discussion about that, because I mean the committee did take quite a strong interest in it, and then obviously you're hearing a lot about oil costs and all those kind of significant changes downward and all that. So it's probably timely to have a look at this again, given the committee's history of that. Okay, members, thanks for that. Okay, the next item is the supported legislation, item number 8. This is the SL around the annual uprating of pensions and benefits. This is on page 24 of your pack. And this is obviously releasing the benefits being increased in line with the CPI. And obviously there's going to be a number of statutory rules drafted as a result of this SL1. Some will be subject to affirmative or negative in some cases. So are members content for the rule to be made?
Great.
Okay, members, thank you for that. The SR 19 2015 Housing Benefit Regulations again on page 34 of your pack. So we considered the SL1 pertaining to the statutory rule at the meeting on 8th of January, and the committee was then content the rule to be made. The regulations restore the policy intention associated with assessment of housing benefit entitlements and clarifies. Just trying to read it. It's a sort of the regulation makes it so that a decision maker should calculate that claimant's average weekly income and expected earnings and so on. But if you know what it represents, so can I take it that people understand what the SR 19 represents? Again, I said papers on page 34 of your packet. I don't want to read it all out. There are no objections to the rule made. It can read it formally in the record. Okay, then that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 19, the Housing Benefit Income and Earnings Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2015, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed on that?
Agreed.
A couple of items of correspondence. We know the correspondence has been received in Ballinafy Community Development Association. That's page 53 of your pack, and that expresses concern with delay in receiving any response in relation to applications for funding. I suggest the committee write to DSD seeking a reason for these delays. Belfast City Council has noted that it cannot respond until it receives information from DSD as well, so it may be pertinent to ask the reason for delay in providing relevant information. Councils also. I suppose it follows on to some extent in the previous conversation, so it can be added into that piece of correspondence. Thank you. Obviously, again, I just want to remind people then we have that letter from the department which is referred to in page 45 of your pack. Okay, I'm ready to say what we're going to do there. Follow that up. The forward work programme, next item is on page 87. The members content with the forward work programme. Okay. Any other business? Anybody? Nothing under AOB. So the formal committee meeting then meets again next Thursday, 12th of February, 10 a.m. Although we're having a special meeting, isn't that right, on Monday? At 11 a.m. 11 a.m. All right, to discuss the welfare reform bill. Okay. So we just need to make sure people remind that, get them into the diary. Okay, members, so we're now moving to closed session to consider the report on phase 2 of the inquiry.
9. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee.